problem, need your help with. A couple of years ago, I loaned 10 grand to one of the deacons, and we had an agreement on how he was to pay it back, and to this day, he's not paid a penny of it. I don't feel like I can take the hit, and would you please help me? The pastor says, well, if I get involved, then it's going to be a problem because one or the other of you is going to think I'm taking sides or whatever, and I need to be pastor to both of you. I can't see how I can be of any help. But, by the way, don't go to small claims court because the Bible teaches we ought not take our brother to court. So what did the pastor do? He gave him a double whammy. He wasn't willing to help, didn't know how to help, and he didn't want him to go to court either. So the elder ended up taking the hit in the pocketbook because he was following the pastor's example. I can be very hard on that pastor because it was me years before I took this training. Now I know I could have facilitated and set up a mediation process or an arbitration process. I had people in my congregation who were fully intelligent enough business people that they could have helped these men and they could have written up an agreement. I wouldn't have had to be involved, but I could have facilitated it. And I learned from that many times people come after they've gone through a seminar like this or something, go ask the church for help, and they get declined because the pastor doesn't know how. Church doesn't know how. The church is very reluctant to get involved in disputes with church families, and rightly so to a degree. But if we understand what biblical mediation and arbitration is like, we can facilitate and help people get the help that they need. So let's talk about how the church can help. That's the whole statement in Matthew chapter 18. If your brother refuses to hear you, take somebody else. If they don't hear that, then take it to the church. That's the short version. But what does it mean to take it to the church? Does it mean that you start blabbing around in the congregation your grievances against another church member? Then take it to the church. No, that's not the right way to do it. On page 58, we have a sequence of taking it to the church. And, okay, here we are. That's on page 58. Jesus taught the principle that I call the principle of ascending involvement. So taking it to the church would be taking it to the pastor first, then to the church board, then to a church business meeting, if necessary. There's a sequence there. You don't just go demanding to have a hearing at the church board or demanding to hear at the church business meeting. The church elders should have been consulted along the line too. I forgot to put that one in there. The pastor, then the elders, then the church board, and then the business meeting. Church discipline is something that should be reserved only as a last and final option. I don't know that we need to discuss the idea of church discipline unless you have questions about it. I'll make a summary statement, and then if you want to ask for more details, you can. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have two forms of church discipline. The first one is church censure, and I'll explain that a little bit. The second one is removal of membership. In church censure, the person cannot participate in a vote of the church, and the business meeting can't serve as a church office, in a church office, and that sort of thing. That's censure, where they have reduced and clarified involvement. That's church censure. Church removal of membership, we used to call it, what do we call it? Disfellowshipping. I had to stop thinking about that for a minute. When we disfellowship, then they're no longer a member of the church. So no, obviously they can't participate then. One of the things that we need to remember is that you cannot disfellowship a person or remove a person from membership. I'm going to back up and say this another way. In summary, I'm trying to make it short, and now I'm getting confusing for you. I'll try to start again and make it sound better. You cannot bring a person into church censure for anything that would not ultimately lead to removal of membership. They're the same things. The principles and the reasons for why a church member can be disciplined are the same. Either way, you first start with censure, and then you can possibly end up with removal of membership. Does that make sense? You can't create your own test and say, well, unless you do this, then we're going to censure you. You can't censure somebody for a reason that is not within the manual for a reason of removal of membership. So let me just pause and see if you have questions that you want to ask about church discipline. And we can address your concerns or your interests rather than just going on.
Or Charlie, if they want to do it in private later.
We can do it in private later, right? How can the church help? On page 59, we can do it by counseling. We can arrange mediation or arbitration. Catch up with the screen here. Well, that's interesting. Why is it not moving? Oh, whoa, how can the church help? I wonder if my, there we go. On the top of page 59. Things to consider before taking it to the church. Can it be overlooked? Have we really tried to resolve it? Have I tried to resolve it through mediation or arbitration? And then what the church can do is provide counseling. We can provide mediation or arbitration. And then we can consider discipline through censure or removal of membership. And then as we get involved in those, we need to remember that these principles need to be adhered to. There should be a timeliness involved.
Can you go back one screen? I wasn't finished.
Can you go back one screen? Sure. Provide counseling, provide mediation and arbitration, and apply discipline through censure or removal of membership. Two observations I have about how we customarily react as individual church families. One is that the church fails to respond when there is a real issue that should have been addressed by the church, and we don't do anything. And then 5 years later, after these people have been set in their way of doing things that are in opposition to the way the church teaches, suddenly a new pastor comes in, looks at the books. Why is this person a member? Oh, because 5 years ago they did this, this, and this. 5 years later, we write them a letter and saying, we need to consider your name in a church business meeting. Well, that's a crude way of saying it, but you know what I mean. We don't do anything when it's timely. And church discipline needs to be restorative. It should be redemptive. It should never be punitive. It should not be the intent. And you can't be restorative if you wait 5 years to act on it. So it needs to be timely. We need to carefully follow the steps in the church manual. That it should be working toward reconciliation and redemption rather than punishment. When I went to a new church in Spokane, Washington in my pastoral days, I found that a lady had not darkened the door of the church for 10 years or whatever. And in my visitation, I stopped by to see her. And she was very, just plain rude. She said, I don't want to be a member of that church. I thought I'd taken my name off the books many years ago. See that it's done. And I said, sorry, the church hasn't responded accordingly to your wishes. I'll be happy to take care of it. So I did. I took it to the next business meeting and they dropped their name. And then I got a smoking letter from her. We sent a letter saying that we had dropped her name in harmony with her wishes. And I got a letter back that was literally smoking almost. And she was upset. The reason was because I had not invited her to appear at the business meeting, which was her right. And she was right. The church manual says that they need to be notified, given the opportunity to come, et cetera, et cetera. I assumed that she didn't want to because she had already told me she wanted her name dropped, so why would she want to come? But I made the mistake of not following the church manual and providing that opportunity. I learned an important lesson from that. We need to follow the procedures.
So what happened?
Well, she didn't make an issue of it. And I apologized to her, and I meant it sincerely. I told her, you taught me a lesson. I should have given you an invitation to do that. Do you still want to come? She said, no, it's a done deal.
Okay.
It wouldn't have made any difference anyway, right?
Probably not.
Or she might have wanted to come to yell at the church and probably was better. No, I'm serious.
It might have been a kind of an ugly scene.
Yeah.
She has the right to do that. You can't avoid a person, avoid giving a person the right.
Yep. Are you on the right slide?
No, we got one more slide here. Things to remember: timeliness, following the steps, reconciliation, redemption should be the one that you're trying to achieve. And finally, it must be for a specific issue. People have a right to know why they are being disciplined. And then finally, on the top of page 60, censure needs to be for a specific time. You cannot leave a person hanging forever on a problem. It needs to be given enough time to change their lifestyle, change their decisions, or whatever the case may be. But it ought not to be longer than a year, the manual says. Give them time, but don't just extend it forever. All right. I don't think I'm going to comment about the difference between censure and removal of membership any further unless you have questions that you want to ask. I don't know anything about the history of this church or where you have attended before. It can be a very sensitive, very sticky wicket, but it doesn't have to if it's done carefully. Yes.
Yeah, I do want to ask, because I want to learn more about the services, that you offer. Do churches, like in this conference, have a conference designated team that can come to help a church mediating or arbitrating? Or is it something that the church or pastor has to,
Oh, I would love to say yes. Every conference has teams like us that are more than willing to come. But I think you already know the answer. No.
That's why you're
Unfortunately.
here.
That's why I'm here. That's why we're here.
Yeah, I see this as a great need, for all the churches to have, to know where to go, for the pastors.
So thank you for opening the door for this advertisement. The purpose, one of the primary purposes that Ron and I created, the Institute for Biblical Peacemakers, is to train individuals to do that thing that we are doing. Now, ultimately, we're on the extreme end. Doing congregational conflict resolution is the high point and the most involved kind of reconciliation that we can train people for. This seminar that you are taking, provided for by your church for you, is the basis of all other training that we do. Other people are taking it online and paying for it. You are working through this course. This course will enable you to take the next step, which would be learning how to be a conflict coach. And we won't take time to describe that for you right now, but then there's another step that some of you may be interested in, conflict coaching, and then conflict mediation. And we will teach that to you online with live presentations, and you will get certification for it, and you can end up theoretically doing exactly what we do in time, and ultimately even in working with congregational conflict resolution. So that's one reason why we're doing what we're doing. The other reason is churches and people need help, and we're there to help.
Any volunteers?
We have training
I
and
got
then,
them hands right there. We'll talk later to get you.
okay.
Down
All
the
right.
road.
Other questions?
How long would that course take to go? Like, how long is the process to get to?
I would say, it would depend on how much you want to work at it and how many opportunities you have. But I think to go from this step with a basic seminar that we're doing today, and then on through to being a certified conciliator, maybe a couple of years. The courses themselves are not that long, 8 to 10 hours, but they're studied to prepare for it. And then we want you to apply it and work with cases under an instructor and then by yourself. And then you study for the next case. So, and it takes time to find instances where you can serve. Depending on what kind of work you do and what your church is like, it might take much longer for some people than others.
Charlie, why don't you give our website? If people want more
Yes,
information.
on the back of the book, the website is right on top of the QR code. The QR code on the back of the book, and at the top of that is our website, biblicalpeacemakers.org. And the training program is outlined there. Okay?
Those of you that are elders, as a reminder, Ron will be going through some different tools at the elders meeting. And,
Okay. What is
In
that?
December.
is it December? Yeah.
Okay, so Ron, come up here and give us a short version of whether or not we should ever use the civil court system.
And I think I'm going to skip the video.
That's fine.
Yes or no?
That's fine.
This video clip, it's a cute one, but we're going to skip it for time's sake, because I know there's some other questions. Should I use the civil courts?
Is your microphone working?
I don't know. Is
No,
it?
it is.
It is now. The answer is not never as a first resort, but Bible teaches Christians should resolve their conflicts within the church instead of filing lawsuits against one another. 3 negative reasons why we shouldn't go to court. It's a bad witness. Oh yeah, you preach godly love and acceptance and forgiveness and you're taking your brother or sister to court. That's a bad witness. It ignores the root problems. You know, the courts do good at, all right, you owe this person this much money, but it doesn't get to the real heart of the issue so much of the time. And there's no reconciliation. You go in an adversarial situation and expect the relationship to improve.
Yeah.
And the Pope and the Dalai Lama climb Mount Everest to share a pastrami sandwich together. It's not going to happen. You gotta be careful. And the Bible is clear about that. Spirit of prophecy is clear about that. So, but are we saying never go to court? Well, I think not. On page 64, occasions when it could be appropriate to use the civil courts. You know, that's that quote you just said. If you've exhausted church remedies, you've tried it God's way, you've tried it the biblical way, and it's still not there, you may have to go to court. If you are asserting biblically legitimate rights, not all rights are right, I like the way they put that. If you have a righteous purpose, and here's how they suggest that you consider that. Will it glorify God if you go to court? And again, most of the time I think the answer is no, but there may be situations where
What's an example of that?
Sabbath work issues?
What?
Sabbath work issues. That's a good quick answer, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you may have to take your employer to court to fight for your right to be a Bible-believing Christian.
That's right.
But that's something you don't want to just rush into. That's going to take prayerful on your knees. God, show me. I don't know what to do. Is it glorifying you if I go to court?
And that would certainly benefit others if it's successful. So those two kind of go hand in hand.
Okay, and that's the second question to ask.
But
Will it?
usually, you're not, if you're taking an employer, usually it's not a brother in the church or a brother or sister in the church. If you're taking an employer,
Oh, okay.
for the Sabbath issue,
Right.
very rarely is it. I had to do that. They didn't actually go to court, but we had to get the conference involved on an issue with my work early on in my career on stuff. So, and they didn't go to court. They went to mediation, and they granted us that privilege. So,
Or they went to arbitration. And again, I want to make that distinction. Civil court and arbitration. The only difference is one's less expensive, less adversarial, less tension, less pressure. You don't need lawyers, or you can go to court and spend more money, hire lawyers, get adversarial, and again, I'm not anti-lawyer. But sometimes lawyers, if they're going to zealously defend their client, they've got to attack the other client, the other party. And they may say things that you would never want said about the other person. Once you get to lawyers, you lose some control because you're paying them to lead your decision. Please, private party arbitration. There's the American Arbitration Association. The Better Business Bureau might offer arbitration. There's lots of less, if you've tried it God's way and it's just the other person won't cooperate, it's Romans 12:18. You do whatever you can do within your ability to live peaceably, to get along with others. Folks, your ability is limited by the other person's willingness to get along.
And Ron, there's a combination of things that I've seen in recent years that can be done. So you can't talk your opposition into getting it resolved through mediation and arbitration. They're going to take you to court. And it has to be settled. What you can do is when it comes time for court, your lawyer can say, Judge, we would like for you to judge that this has to go to arbitration. Because the judge can do that, and that party is forced into arbitration rather than going through the expense of court. It's the judge's prerogative to insist that this be tried in mediation and arbitration.
We're going to talk more about that later because I think it's a civil right that we can go to court. And you're saying the judge can deny my civil right to take somebody to
Well, he
court?
would say it would be tried, it wouldn't be binding arbitration,
Okay,
but he would say you need to try. There's a difference.
there's a difference. And when you go to court, the judge's decision is binding. Unless you can prove malfeasance or, you know, the judge erred in some way, it's binding. Same with arbitration, typically. Unless you can prove that the arbitrator messed up somehow, their ruling is binding, unless you go in ahead of time and say, hey, we don't want binding arbitration. We want this person to make the ruling or this panel to make the ruling, but we're agreeing in advance that if we don't like the outcome, either of us, we still reserve the right to go to court. So that word binding is an important word, and you need to make sure you're both on the same page. Are we both committed to the outcome, or is there an option afterwards? Did I say that
That's right.
appropriately? All right. All right. So, will it glorify God? Will it benefit others? Is it necessary to preserve the essential rights or assets? Again, folks, we're playing this game of life on the enemy's home turf. Can I get an amen to that?
Amen. And I want to put a point D in there the next time we print. It may be necessary because an insurance company is involved. And you may have to begin the legal process in order to bring them to the point of settling on the courthouse steps, as we say.
If this was a godly world, I'm sorry?
So what is the?
That if an insurance company is involved.
You may have to use the legal process.
Yeah, a third party may demand to preserve their rights, they may demand that you go to court. That could happen easily.
That's exactly what I want.
You know, it'd be nice if people would live by the Bible. Be nice if the Bible wasn't necessary because people were doing that naturally. But that hasn't come yet. It's coming. The day will come.
Amen.
They will come. So there may become times also, though, we'll choose to suffer the consequences of an offense rather. Again, why not rather be wrong?
That's what 1 Corinthians 6, I think, isn't it 6? It says that.
Yeah.
Hey, somebody's trying to cheat you. Why don't you rather do that than take him to court? If they does something wrong, you go ahead and take your beef rather than go take him to court.
Back on 63, if you just glance at that, that's exactly right. 1 Corinthians 6. Sometimes you got to measure, you know what, wait a minute, it's not right. If we have time, we should show that video if they're willing to stick around. It's a cute video, but it's about 5 minutes. So I want to move on because we really need to get to lesson 12 for sure. So again, those are the extremes. Totally overlook it, take them to court. There's a whole lot in the middle, isn't there? A whole lot in the middle that we can choose from, and that's what we're hoping that the people are learning more and more about. That wait a minute, there are options where I didn't think there were options. There are. So on page 65, what are 3 specific situations that would be appropriate to use civil courts? Any guesses on that? Any suggestions? What would you put on that? Oh, there's one. Where criminal activity is involved. Folks, don't try to mediate. Anyhow, I'll use the child molester because we're all painfully aware of those situations. Don't try to mediate or arbitrate when a crime has been involved. That's what the courts are for. That's what the courts are for. Or how about when a legal record is needed? We need to have official transcripts and know exactly what was decided and so forth. Or sadly, again, Romans 12:18. You've done your part. You've tried. You've offered. You've gone in good faith, and the other party will not use mediation or arbitration. Then I don't know what other options you're left with other than going to court. You've tried everything you can try. But look at page 65. I want to wrap up on this. Am I sure I cannot overlook this offense? Not how I feel. Can I decide, you know what, it's not a hill to die on. I'm going to overlook it. And another thing on that, it's so funny. God is so good to me in so many ways. He's good to you in so many ways. One of the ways he's good to me is when I start to get upset, especially with another driver who just did something. And by the way, I live in New Mexico.
Uh-oh.
New Mexico license plates used to be yellow. What's the universal color for caution? Yeah, they should have left them yellow. You're driving with New Mexicans. But when I start to get upset about somebody, I almost instantly realize, you know what, I've done that. I've done that. I've cut out in front of somebody when I didn't see him. I brake too quickly because something happened. What right do I have to get upset with somebody else who's doing something exactly that I have done? And so it's gotten easier. We're going to talk more about that in a couple of weeks. But it's easier to overlook than sometimes we think it is. Have I sincerely tried to work this out by talking directly with the offending party?
A couple of weeks, how long they gonna stay?
Have I tried again? I'm on page 65, number 3. Have I tried to have others in the church help us resolve this dispute? Have I tried to have the church help us resolve this dispute? What? Others in the church and then the church. And then number 5, have I been willing to use the discipline process if it is applicable to the dispute? Folks, take some prayerful time to ask those questions before you go to court. Again, I hope you're not hearing us say, never go to court, you're a terrible sinner, you're a bad Christian if you ever go to court. I hope you didn't hear me say that, and I know Charles didn't say that. Never is a first result, and never likely until you've taken those steps. So then on page 66 and 67, those of you who might think, you know, hey, I might like to be a mediator or arbitrator someday, those are some of the steps that are involved in that process. I'll invite you to look through those on your own, because look at the title for chapter 12, would you please? Raise your hand if you ever have, never mind, Charlie. We all have to deal with difficult people. And sometimes, if we can admit it, we are those difficult people, aren't we?
Right, who is a difficult person? Anyone who disagrees with me.
That's right.
Well, we are going to just summarize this, and hopefully you will encourage it. I have just rewritten this last chapter to include much more than we used to teach, and now we don't even have 15 minutes to cover it because we want to talk about your homework assignments and what's coming up this week. But let's look at a few things. Paul says in Romans 12:21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. The simple fact is, folks, that we have people within the church family that use ungodly means to try to get the church or individuals in the church to do what they want. I call it doing God's work like the devil.
Nope.
I've seen people use intimidation, to use, what are some of the other descriptives that we could use? Manipulation,
Deception.
Coercion.
other ungodly means to try to get the church or an individual in the church to do what they want to do. And you know what? It works some of the time.
In the short run.
In the short run, but the ramifications of it are disastrous. And we need to avoid any time we can. So one thing we cannot do is to respond in kind. If we respond in kind, we've only accentuated the situation. On page 68, look at some of the reasons why Priestville might be unreasonable. Number 1, a lack of information. I worked with a conference president that taught me this anonymous thing. I don't think it began with him. The more information a person has, the more reasonable they tend to be. And I've seen it with conference presidents, with pastors, with other leaders, that those men or women who want to play their cards close to the chest, as they say, and not divulge all the information, are the ones that are getting in trouble. They're the ones that church members suspicion because they're not seemingly telling the whole story. Now, it's true that in some cases, leaders can't tell everything, but the more information that we can give, openly, honestly, being transparent in our leadership, the more it will be that we'll have less and less conflict. That's the way it goes. Now, one of the reasons we have unreasonable people is sinful attitudes and desires, such as power and control, selfishness, and pride. And we have to deal with them because we're dealing with people, and we're all sinners, and needing to be saved by the grace of God. So, when we talk about dealing with unreasonable people, the first question to ask, in my opinion, is why is this person being unreasonable, in our opinion? What is behind that? And we may come up with some things we don't like to answer. It may be a mental illness. It may be a personality disorder, such as borderline personality, histrionic personality, and narcissism. These are all things that happen within the church. And our challenge is, as leaders, as Christians, that most of us are not competent psychologists or psychiatrists to diagnose these kind of problems. And yet we have to live with these people. You still have to deal with the results of what this kind of a person can do to a church board meeting or a church business meeting or committees or whatever. I was a member of a church in British Columbia during my days as ministerial director. I was often visiting other churches because it's part of my job, and I didn't know the congregation that well. On one particular Sabbath when I was home, I met a lady that I had not met before, and she approached me. I don't remember what the situation was, but I recognized this is not a normal person. And when I talked to my pastor about it, he said, oh, you met EGR, did you? And I said, what's her name? He said, well, we have a name for her privately among the leaders. Her nickname is EGR. And I said, what does that mean? He said, it means extra grace required. All the leaders knew that when you're dealing with Denise, that happened to be her name, you had to do extra grace because she had some mental weaknesses. I wouldn't say she was mentally ill, but she had some mental weaknesses that caused her to act the way she was. So there are a number of things involved here that we're not going to take the time for, except to suggest to you that material is here. I would make a comment about the subject of narcissism, because too often we have individuals struggling with this personality disorder within our church family. And I think the material on page 72 and 73 would be a help. One of the professionals that I quoted in dealing with this subject is on page 72. Dr. Morgan suggests that in considering narcissism as an all or a nothing, there's a narcissist or they're not narcissists, it's easier to think of it as a progression, a spectrum of narcissism. He suggests even that all of us have a tendency toward narcissism to some degree within our personality. It's just a matter of how strong that is exhibited. And it's the people that are on the extreme end of the right-hand side that you have difficulty with. And they call that dark, toxic narcissism on top of page 73. They don't rolling the lines there. Oh yes, there it is. Dark, toxic, habitual narcissism is an example of how our strengths become our weaknesses and be used in ways that are hurtful to others. The narcissistic individual often is a very talented person, very capable, very well-spoken perhaps, a natural-born leader, people might think. But then when they're elected or put into office, they find out that they're almost intractable to work with. They're demanding. They don't consider anybody else's viewpoint of any value whatsoever, and they can bring a church down to its knees in turmoil if they are a dark, extreme narcissist. So what do we do? How do we deal with them? Look on page 73 and we'll review some principles very quickly. First of all, we need to avoid labeling. We're not professional. It does not help in a situation like that to call a person a narcissist. It's almost like using a bad name. You'll get a negative reaction. Rather than addressing motives, let's talk about their actions. Describe the actions that are a problem instead of accusing them of having improper motives. We can draw boundaries that can be clearly identified. All right? So we're going to give a person a task to do, explain to them this is what you are to do, this is what your committee is to do, work with your committee, but don't go over here. That's so-and-so's responsibility. In situations where the narcissist individual is not so extreme, that would be helpful. Carefully consider the ramifications before confronting directly, because in the extreme narcissist, it will not work. It'll probably backfire. And if you are the employer or supervisor and have the authority, consider terminating the relationship, because it's not going to be likely to get better. Going on quickly to review some things, and then we'll take questions. On page 74, more general suggestions in dealing with unreasonable people. Confronting is only going to be helpful for people who exhibit mild or moderate examples of these problems. If confrontation is used, be sure to have witnesses so that somebody else can testify to what you have done, because that person is likely to turn the tables and accuse you of the very things that they have been doing. And then finally, recognize your limits. Realize you're not going to be able to work with everybody. There will be some people that you just can't do it. Paul says if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, suggests that there may be some that you can't work with and you may need to back off. And in doing so, at the bottom of page 75, we need to remember that we need to keep doing what is right. If we are a leader dealing with a situation like that, we have to take the steps, make the decisions that we need to make after carefully determining all of the information, leading the church or the committee into its action, and stay by it. There's a saying that you may have heard. I think it comes from this part of the world. If you keep listening to the naysayers, revisiting decisions over and over again, you're going to be as busy as a stray dog at a Whistlers convention. I'm waiting for that one to sink in. You're going to be as busy as a stray dog at a Whistlers convention. In other words, we need to prayerfully, carefully determine all of the issues, make a decision, and then move forward, because there will always be those that want you to revisit the decision. If they don't like what was decided, they're going to criticize the process and try to bring you back to it. The one thing you cannot do is to respond in kind. And our last fill in the blank, is it on page 75? Not quite, there's one on page 76. The ultimate weapon is deliberate, focused love. I had a church member in one of my next to last church district who was one of those naysayers. In Canada, we call them backbenchers. They're always expressing the opposition view. And I had a philosophy that I wanted to have that kind of a person on my board. I didn't want to hear about it later. I wanted to hear about it right up front so we could deal with it and respond. So for 4 years, I heard his objections to things that kept coming over and over again. And frankly, folks, he was a pain in the neck, if you can put it plainly. Well, the time came when I accepted a call to go elsewhere, and they had the conventional or typical farewell party for the pastor and his family. And they gave people a chance to share. And we heard nice things. And I don't remember anything that anybody else said until they gave the microphone to this naysayer. And I thought, oh my, what's he going to say? And he started by saying, you folks may know that I haven't always agreed with Pastor Brown. And I thought, well, that's an understatement. What's next? Then he said, but I want to tell you, I have never had to question the fact that Pastor Brown loved me. That was payday, folks. Somehow, by the grace of God, I was able to manifest it in such a way that even though we didn't agree, he knew that I loved him as a brother in this church. And that's our challenge as Christian leaders, to do so, negotiate it in such a way that we're always understanding that we love one another. On the last page 76, doing good. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. Eat golden, coals of fire on his head, and that concept. Doing good can protect you from your own bitterness and resentment, and it may just bring the other person to repentance. And with that, you filled in your last blank. How about that? We've hurried through that. If you have questions, we'll entertain questions right now, and then we'll talk about the rest of the week. Any questions you want to ask? Yes.
There's a lot of emphasis on narcissism as a problem that you might deal with, personality problem. But I think that one that's probably more common nowadays is the spectrum of, what am I trying to say? Autism, yes.
Autism?
Asperger's and stuff. Because you have some of these same symptoms evident and people that are not necessarily intentional with their difficulty, but they are. They're just difficult.
Right. They're not responding in a normal way. And that's one thing that we might summarize by saying we cannot expect everybody to function as a normal individual. we have to give leeway at times for the non-functioning person to work with us and in our sphere without expecting him to respond in every normal way.
I just want to say something real quick. Hello, man. One of my key verses is Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ, therefore I get to have life my way, on my terms, exactly how I want.
Is that the Seventh-day Adventist Revised Version you're reading from?
It's the blasphemous version. I'm crucified with Christ, therefore I no longer live. And I'm going to promise you right now, I haven't mastered that verse, but the days that I can live that, when I can realize it's not about me.
That's right.
It's about me being a tool in the hands of my Savior to bless others. So when people say something I don't like, when they treat me in ways that I don't like, I have two choices, folks. I can either react to the attack or I can minister to the pain. Because people who treat us in ways that we don't appreciate, I said this yesterday, I'll say it again in a couple of weeks, they're hurting people. And hurting people are going to hurt people. It's going to happen. So again, if we can be Christ's hands and his people in those situations, we can be such a blessing, not just to others, but to ourselves. There's a joy in being God's servant to bless others. True or false?
True. Okay, we're going to give you the copy of the results of your surveys that you did Sabbath at worship hour. So each of you should get 2 pages. One of them will have that downhill slide arrow on it, and the other one will be the church atmosphere survey that has 3 parallel vertical columns. I may have one of those, please.
Yes.
See, I actually have that one. Thank you.
I need it.
So 2 sheets, one with 4 parallel columns, vertical columns, and the other one is the downhill slide with the church picture at the top and the smaller church picture down at the bottom. And you're going to be interested to see what kind of a picture you painted of your own church family.
Okay, I need one.
And I need one of those. One of the reasons I started using this is that I found that it was very difficult for a church to recognize the severity of their conflict. Every church would like to see itself as being normal. And because people are people, every church has conflict. So they want to perceive it being normal. And let's face reality that in many cases, church members have not had the privilege that some of us have had of being involved in a number of different church families. So they may not recognize that their church is sick, to put it bluntly, that is not functioning well, it's dysfunctional, because they've not seen how a functional church works. So we created these surveys to help a church recognize when it's getting to be serious. Let's take the one with the 4 parallel vertical columns, first of all. You'll see that there were 30 of you that turned in this sheet, and I'll explain how they're tabulated and what the numbers mean. You'll see under the first statement, when I come to the church, I generally find the church atmosphere to be positive, and it has 16 beside it. That means 16 of the 30 said, checked that or circled that. 14 of the 30 circled or checked neutral, and none of you checked negative. So on the right-hand column, far right, you have 30 people responding. That's the way it works. You will also notice something that is not obvious when you went through it, that the left-hand column, well, I guess yours are all gray, aren't they, because it was a black and white copier. The left-hand column are all positive responses. The next column in the central are all neutral responses, not really bad, not really good, just neutral. And the right-hand column are negative, and then the extreme right would be the total of the number of people that checked that. So, for example, on the second statement, when relating to newcomers and members who are coming back to church, I think my church is generally friendly. Uh-oh, there's a number is missing there. I am so sorry. So you can fill in the number of 12. no, 22. 22, because there were 0 that said unfriendly. And there were 30 responses. Sorry about that little error. All right, I'm not going to read every one of these, but I want to point out 1 or 2 that are significant, and then I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions about others. You'll notice that the left-hand column totals 45% of the total number of answers. That's nearly half of you saw the responses as being normal or positive. The central column of neutral answers are 37%, and the negative column totaled 18%. I would say that the responses you folk gave, compared to other churches where I have worked, and Ron worked with me with one other one, these are more positive than many Adventist churches. You don't have to beat yourselves up. It's not as bad as it could be. It's not as good as it could be either. But for nearly 50% of the responses to be on the positive side is good. You have room to grow because there's 37% that are neither good nor bad. If I were your pastor, and if this was my church, I would want to total the center column of neutral responses with the negative column, because I don't want my church to just be neutral. I want it to be positive. Okay, so if you add those two, you're going to be 55% of responses that could be improved. So there's work that you can do, but you don't have to beat yourselves up. All right, one that I look for because of the work that Ron and I came here to do is number 7. Do you have any unresolved issues with others in your church? That's very personal, confidential. There were no names attached to this. And there were 16 that said no. That's good. That's good not to have any unresolved issues. There were 4 that said, I don't know. Now, how can a person not know what someone is going to say? Well, it works like this. You come to Sabbath school next Sabbath, and Sister Jones comes through the door, and she doesn't look at you, doesn't say hi, you say happy Sabbath, she doesn't respond, and she goes on her way. Well, what's up with Sister Jones? Well, maybe she's got an issue with you, and maybe she's just preoccupied and didn't notice. So it's very likely or very possible to not know if you have others that have unresolved issues with you. And there are 4 people who said that. There are 9 people that know. Yes, I have unresolved issues. Now, folks, here comes the clincher. We're going to be looking at the responses that you turn in today in your homework assignments. Are you willing to share what that unresolved issue is and who it's with and ask for help? Or are you just going to go on pretending that nothing's going to change? And not have faith to believe that God can change things if you trust in Him and reach out for help. So we're hoping that the 9 people and maybe even the 13 people that check these 2 responses will in fact reach out and share with us. That doesn't mean that we're going to do anything necessarily except talk to you, and then we'll see if we can help by proceeding with some kind of reconciliation. The last one I'll comment on, and then we're open to your questions. Do you think unresolved conflict is hindering your church? This is number 9. Yes, 12 people said, and 8 people said, I don't know, that's 20. That's 2/3 are thinking that maybe unresolved conflict in your congregation is hindering Lord's work from going forward. All right, I'm going to stop and allow you to ask questions about any other specifics that you see there.
By the way, is everybody here a member of the church, Charlie? Did we ask that?
We did not ask that question.
What did he say?
Are all of you members of the church?
Not-
Not of this church, but you're members. Okay. And we are talking about local issues here. I don't know that anybody's going to be offended by you staying by while we discuss that. And you may see how it works, even though you're not involved. Pastor, you were raising your hand
I
about
was saying
something?
number 6 also has a significant number that feel like the,
Yes, number 6. Do you know people who are not attending your church because of unresolved conflict? 16 people said yes, that's significant. Now that does not say anything about how many people are not attending. It might be 16 of you know that one person. Not likely to be the case, but that's theoretically possible. And it's also possible that 8 would say, well, I know people are not attending, but I don't know why. So those are legitimate answers. But that number would also suggest that there's work to do, isn't there? Okay? Any other observations or questions?
And it's piggybacking what you say, that 16 could be one, that 16 could comprehend like a whole family. If you say,
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
this family doesn't come anymore.
I recently worked with a church that had a blow up because the nominating committee recommended a female church elder from the result of their nominating committee work. And when the committee report was voted, one of the elders, a man, stormed up to the front of the church, plunked his key to the church down and said, if this church is going to have female elders, I'm out of here. And he walked out right in the middle of the church service. You know, it's sometimes it's very obvious what people are upset about. Other times they just quietly slip away and you don't know.
Which was that?
Okay, let's look at the other sheet quickly. The downhill slide. And this one you were asked to check however many of these statements that you feel applied to your church. And folks, I'm going to warn you, it's hard to understand how you can be all talking about the same church. Because some of you checked only the first 5 or some of the first 5 that we have categorized now as normal. On the other sheet, some of you checked only the far left column, like the church is ready for translation. So it's hard to understand how different people can have a different view about the same congregation, but we're human and that's the fact of the matter. So the way this summary worked is 23 of you checked the first one. Our church is generally peaceful. That's good. And this is out of, again, 30 individuals responding. Number 2, our church handles conflict in a biblical way. 16 of you, that's a little over half. So that's good, but not as good as it could be, right? And number 3, I have confidence in the ability of our church's leadership to handle conflict. 2/3 of you checked that. And number 4, 19 of you checked our pastor does not take sides unless there's a moral or theological issues. So again, that's close to 2/3. These are all good, healthy responses. 5 is not quite so significant as about 50% said most of our members handle conflict well. Now, you'll notice that these 4 categories were not identified on the sheet when you filled them out. We put those in because it gets progressively more negative as you go down to where people may be talking about using civil courts as a means of resolving problems. The way we tabulated them is in the first category that the categories normal, 93 check marks were included in that. In other words, if you total up from 23 down through 14, there's 93 responses there. That accounts for 41% of all of the comments that were made on the sheet. In the second category that we call troubled, there's 23%. So if you total those 2 particular sections, you'd have, 64, 65% of the responses being normal or not too much more than normal. Which means that the severely troubled and chaotic categories were significantly smaller, but they're still there, and you need to give attention to them. I want to say that number 10 is encouraging. Our pastor has not been taking sides, or when it says our pastor has been taking sides on issues that are not moral theological, only 3 persons checked that. Most of you felt that that was not an issue. And I would say that throughout this survey, the pastor comes through very good. You can be pleased with your pastor's response. I think you would all agree that he's human and he can make mistakes. But he's well received and appreciated.
I have one, thank you. I have one other, thank you.
What questions might you want to ask about what you see on this sheet? One observation is, how can anyone see the church as being chaotic when others are seeing it as very normal? My observation is that if they are involved in a particular issue, then it taints the picture for everything. If I'm in the heat of a controversy with someone, then I tend to see it as being quite chaotic all around. So a person who's just a casual attender, and maybe only been here 6 months or whatever, doesn't know about what some of the things going on behind the scenes are, they would see it as very normal. So it helps to explain how 2 people can see things so very differently. Any questions? Okay,
Back on the chaotic thing, I think a lot of times when you tend to be in leadership and more involved in stuff in church, you see more of the chaotic stuff.
yes,
A lot of times, if you come, as you said earlier, and you just come to church conveniently or not really take part, you enjoy the service, you go home, you don't really see the stuff that goes on behind doors to get stuff the way it's supposed to be. But I mean, there's issues everywhere you go. I mean, what I said, the more involved you are, the more you're gonna see the chaos.
the more involved you are, the more you're likely to see the chaos that can happen, or see where the conflict is, that's just natural. It's not a problem to recognize that there's conflict, no matter how, as a church, we're gonna deal with the conflict, where the problem comes in, the challenge. All right, let's talk about the rest of the week. We want you to turn in your homework assignments. We hope that if you haven't done so, you'll do so. And if you've taken Friends of People, we hope that they will get the message that we need those right away in order for them to be of value to us. So you can pass it to Ron, or you can finish it and bring it up and give it to us afterwards. But in order to be of any value, we have to have that. Now, how are we going to deal with it? We've already told you nobody else will see it except us, unless we ask your permission. And we will bind ourselves to that commitment. So you can trust us to handle it that way. And then you can help us decide what the next step should be, if there should be any other steps.
You have the one I shared with you earlier.
Yes, I do. Oh, you need that.
What do you need? You need
Let's put down. In here. Somewhere.
All three passes.
you want to turn that in? Or do you
I already
start?
gave it.
Oh, all right, bye-bye.
All right, a reminder to church board members that tomorrow evening at 6:30, we will meet with the church board and we will have a review of what has been written. We will not be divulging who said what. And the personal unresolved issues, we would report like 5 people told us they have unresolved issues, and we're going to be working with them as we can. That's all we would say. It's the organizational or congregational issues that we would spend more time in identifying and deciding where to go from there. So board meeting tomorrow night at 6:30, what room, Pastor?
Fellowship Hall.
In the fellowship hall.